Hi,
Very good.
everyone. It's Michelle Strasburger from HR Rebooted.
Hi, and I'm Tracy Spanenberg, and we're so delighted to have Adam Rosenfield here as our guest. And we met Adam, well, I think I met him a while ago through Twitter, but we met him during a conversation we had with our HR Rebels last week, which was a really wonderful, challenging discussion on race. And it was fascinating, and he had a lot of great things to say. And we're going to chat a little bit about that conversation and about lots of other things. So welcome, Adam.
Thanks for having me on. I'm excited to be able to chat about this.
So tell us a little bit about you.
Yeah, so I am based out of Austin, Texas, and started up as a recruiter. Went into HR, and yeah, I unfortunately was one of the ones impacted by COVID, but have since sort of expanded myself. The topics I really like to discuss are diversity, equity, inclusion, bias, engagement, talent management, and I'm really, what attracted me to HR Rebooted is I think we all three sort of agree on how on the fact that HR needs to change, and for HR leaders to reboot and to really be different, like we have to start having these difficult conversations, which is why the HR Rebels chat was so great. I mean, it was honest, and I mean, as an HR pro, like that's what that's who I am, honest, in integrity, and not afraid to have the difficult conversations. So yeah, that's me.
It's great. I think as HR professionals, we're conditioned early on to not get political, though clearly these are not political issues. These are human issues, and we're cautioned not to rock the boat, at least those of us who've been in HR for a couple of decades. And I think for my own evolution, I've had a huge change. And like, to your point, you have to be willing to speak up and speak out. You have to. We're our employee advocates. You have to do that. It's no longer an option not to. And I think we see a lot of people not doing that, who have been quiet when they should be loud.
I think so. It's interesting you say that, because one of the things I'm actually writing about is what the new HR person looks like, and I think the new HR person has to be culturally conscious. And to your point, like, that person is not going to be neutral. Honestly, I think we're going to be seeing more employee advocates, rather than people who employee advocates who understand the business, rather than people who are sort of lackeys for their company. And sorry, potential employers, if you're watching this, but for us to make any headway with HR, employees have to see that we care. And too often, especially over the past couple of weeks of companies that have been going on, we've been seeing, hey, like, HR has aided and abetted this particular male or female executive who has been accused of racist statements, fostering a racial environment. I mean, just look at Barbara Fadita. She was like a talent exec from ABC News, 12 HR complaints, millions of dollars in settlements. So what did HR do about it? And I think the new HR professional really has to be that almost non-neutral in a sense, and really advocating for a better workplace, rather than sort of CYA that plenty of other HR people are sent to do.
I agree with you 100%, Adam. I think that the new HR professional also has to be courageous, because as Tracy said, you can't stay quiet. You have to say something, and you have to stand up and say, I think saying nothing is worse than saying something and making a mistake.
And that comes with being willing to potentially lose your job in an ethical standpoint. And I think we do see some of that out there. And we saw that with Kayla on Twitter. And we really, I admire that. And I think, I'd like to think that's something that I would do now. I also like to think that, fortunately, the kind of company I'm in, that's not going to be an issue. But I don't know early in my career if I would have had the courage And I think that that courage that Michelle mentions is absolutely, absolutely necessary. And we're navigating challenging things right now.
Yeah, and courage is key. And I mean, knowing Kayla, knowing the environment she was in, and obviously seeing kind of what went on, you know, that takes a lot of courage. And I think the greater HR network. I mean, luckily I didn't see any backlash from her for the greater HR network, but you know, we have to, instead of protecting those who maybe are, you know, who are the same people who are at SHRM over and over and over again and parroting the same lines, like we in the HR profession need to protect people like her, you know, those who are committed to an anti-racist environment, a environment that stamps out that conscious and unconscious bias. Because if we don't do that as HR pros, well, then this stuff is going to fester. But if there's a whole group of HR people who have a backlash, you know, who see one of their own getting treated like this and have a backlash, then that's how we're going to make change.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that we referenced that our talk, the Rebels talk, we talked about unconscious bias, and we talked about Black Lives Matter, and we can't really go any further in the conversation with acknowledging the fact that we're all white, and we're having this conversation. We have these conversations with interesting people, and Adam certainly is one and had a point of view. But that's something that I'd like to think I've always been conscious of. I'm particularly conscious of now. And I think Michelle and I have had a lot of conversations about this, and as white women who probably know some Amy Coopers of the world, and who aren't racist, right? But that's not enough. So we need to be anti-racist. And I think those conversations were really helpful in giving us a start to do that. But I think I see a lot of our peers being silent, and I see a lot of our peers who aren't being silent, who are just struggling. How do we help? What do we do? And I know you're very connected with, you've done some training, and you've done certainly you've been involved in a lot of different conversations. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing is that it's not enough just to be like, oh, I'm not racist, because guess what? Like, there were plenty of people during the civil rights movement who said, well, I'm not racist, but right. Just because you're not racist doesn't mean you're complicit. Like, you gotta call it out. You have to teach others. And like, honestly, it starts in your own home. Because if you're not calling out a grandparent or a spouse or a child or somebody like that, well, then what you're telling them is, you know what, you might be anti-racist, but you're letting me get away with it. So I can probably get away with it. I can probably get away with it elsewhere. And, you know, I don't think like, yes, we're all in HR, and, you know, I'd say we're all semi-culturally conscious, but I don't think we still understand the lived experiences, you know, that are, and I say this too, like, I mean, as a white male, I don't understand the experiences that women go through. And right. Because you guys go through a totally different experience. And then now think of it from your Black colleague's perspective, or your Hispanic colleague, or, I mean, even further, like your LGBTQ colleague or your trans colleague, because, you know, it's not just Black Lives Matter, it's Black trans lives matter. It's, it's seeing who all is like discriminated against, and understanding who is discriminated against, and fostering a truly anti-racist workplace, you know, before you can even say, hey, like, yeah, we know we have an inclusive workplace, because you can't be inclusive without first being anti-racist.
Right.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, and you can't be either without understanding and making space for lived experiences. Because, you know, I've never been reduced to a stereotype at work, but other people have. And it's understanding that and learning how to combat that.
I think learning, Adam, is one of the best things we could do. And I've been tremendously moved over the last couple of weeks, just sitting and listening and hearing people's stories and what they've gone through. And one of the things I heard last week in a talk that Bravely did with some incredible men and women of color, that they said empathy is not about putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. It's about putting yourself aside and understanding the shoes they're walking in. And I thought that was so powerful. And I think that's what we need to do as HR professionals, is take the time to just listen, ask questions and listen, and hear their stories. And that's where we're going to find out how we can help and how we can be allies in this movement for equity, for Black lives.
Yeah, I mean, I 100% agree with you. And honestly, like, that's something I've struggled with is stepping aside, because I think we all want to promote and we all want to say, hey, we're anti-racist and this is what we're doing. This is how we're going to do it. But I think you're right. Like, sometimes it was a conversation I had with somebody last week, as job seeker, like, sometimes I struggle to step aside because we want to be out in front and get people to notice us, but now is the time to amplify other people's stories and help them tell their stories.
And as I think back to, I do a lot of speaking now, I think back to conferences that I've been at, and and I'm very conscious now when I look at companies, and I've been doing this and looking at a number of websites and looking at the leadership team and the makeup of the leadership team, and looking back at conferences and different companies and it's so white and it's not representative, and we all know this, and I'm hopeful that we're starting to see the seeds of change, and I think we are. I'm worried that like many other things, that will kind of stop the momentum. So I've made a commitment to my friends to keep talking and talking and talking. And I think it's important that, like you said, we're amplifying voices and that we're listening to stories and that we are trying to make the space for change to happen. And it's shocking that that's still necessary, but it is. And, it starts with simple things like when we talk to our kids at the dinner table. And I think the way our kids are raised, they're like, yeah, we get it. They're very socially conscious and they're anti-racist, and we talk about protests and we talk about all kinds of things. And I think for me too, it's calling out microaggressions or calling out behavior in others that I again may not have done before, and I'm extremely conscious of that now. And I think that is one of the smallest, biggest things we can do. It's a small thing, but it has to happen. We have to do that. We all have to do that.
What's the biggest thing you guys struggle with when it comes to like bias and understanding like anti-racism?
I think I'm very conscious of how I'm too conscious probably of what I say and what I do, and am I asking the right questions, or is it appropriate for me to approach one of my Black friends and ask questions? And so that's been a tricky area for me. For my own biases, I think I don't know. So I think we all have them. I mean, we all do. And I grew up in New Hampshire, which is just 95% white. So it's, I've certainly done a lot of self-reflection, and I like I said, I like to think I'm not racist, but am I anti-racist? And I know I'm trying to be, but am I? So that's something I've thought a lot about.
Michelle, what about you?
I try to make sure that I'm asking myself the tough questions. So when I'm looking at a resume or, reading an email or a LinkedIn message from somebody who's interested in a job, I try to make sure I'm asking myself, why am I saying no, right? Why am I passing on this person? Just to give myself that second check. It's not because of the name on the resume or the location or whatever other reason that could be a bias. So I try to make sure that I call that out on myself, because I think they're called unconscious biases because we're not conscious of it. Right. So I'm trying to test myself. And I think the other thing for me is calling it out with other leaders. And sometimes that's hard. I've had leaders in the past where we've had the perfect candidate. Phone screen was great. Everything went well. It has the skill set. The person came in for the interview, and the person was transgender. And the manager said, nope, not hiring them. And, you have to, and this goes back to courage again, like, are you making this decision because of what you saw or because of an unconscious bias or because they're really not the right fit for the job? And I think we have to make sure we're doing that as HR professionals. And it's hard. It's not easy to call somebody out that you work with, that you have to face every day. It's really hard.
Yeah. I mean, I think it can be difficult. I think especially when you deal with older execs, and I mean that's an example of bias already, like ageism. But I think the workplace 20 years. I think a lot of people who are in exec roles, and I say a lot not to generalize, but there are a good amount that when they were brought up, it was you're male, female, and you do a job. And this is what you're supposed to do, 9 to 5, clock in, clock out. But I think, as work has become more distributed, but also more like culturally conscious. I mean, I think companies are taking more stands than ever. And whether or not those stands are legitimate, that's another thing. But with so many different people coming into the workforce, I think I think it's very confusing for a lot of people who, have grown up in this like structured hierarchy almost. And I know both of you have more experience than I do, and maybe you can speak to this, but, I think it's very hard for when we say bring your whole self to work, people don't necessarily understand because they're like, wait, well, aren't you supposed to bring it? And it's like, well, if one part of you can't shine, then how are you expected to do good work?
Yeah, and are the systems set up to support bringing, is a company set up, you can say, we support everyone and we have an inclusive culture, but do your actions match that? And I think that's something that, we all have to ask ourselves. Are we doing everything that we can to support everyone on our teams?
Yeah. And I mean, I think it even starts with, as Michelle said, like the hiring process. I mean, it starts with, do you need to remove names? Are you asking the same consistent questions for everybody? Right. Because sometimes consistency is, are you not spending 5 minutes going, oh yeah, so where'd your name come from? And because then you're not giving everybody a fair chance. Yes, there is part of it like that's being culturally conscious, but I think it's I don't know. I think it's we have to teach people, especially our C-suite, who is, and this is how we grow as HR people. We have to teach our C-suite that, understanding that all these new faces in the workforce and helping people bring their full selves is actually a business case. And, if you're not actively practicing anti-racism, well, that leads to a whole lot of things. I mean, the ABC News exec cost ABC News probably, $10, $15 million over the course of her career. Imagine what you could have invested for $10 to $15 million. It could have been more people, more training. You could have maybe a show or something like that. So I think.
I also think that looking really deeply at your processes, so just like you said, recruiting is important. I learned on the HR Rebel call, you know, thinking, oh, we do our recruiting process. It's fair. We hire the best person for the job, you know, blah, blah, blah. But then as I thought about what other companies are doing to make sure they're partnering with local groups that focus on people of color, to go to those groups and partner with them and say, we're looking for the skill set. Who do you have? I realized that we're actually not doing enough in our processes to make sure that we're getting the word out to a diverse group of people that we're hiring.
Right.
So there's things that we can do even there in our processes to make sure that we're casting a wider net, right? We're posting on you know, LinkedIn, which is very much white collar, Glassdoor, and places like that. We're not necessarily posting in local women's groups or you know, other areas that could attract a broader and more diverse group of talent. So you kind of, there's that a bit of naivety where you're like, oh yeah, we're doing great. And then you actually get down to it and you're like, well, we could do better, right? There are areas where we can do better.
Yeah. Can you hear me? I think I lost my earbuds.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Oh, good. So I think that's interesting. I was talking about this the other day where years and years ago, I worked for UPS, and we had a 1,200 person facility. And one of the things that we were great about was we went out into the community and met with community leaders in different areas of the community and recruited from these groups. And this was 20 plus years ago, and we had a very diverse team. Very diverse. And we did all kinds of things to make it easier and more accessible for people of color to work for us and people from those communities. And to your point, Michelle, I think, you know, we think the same thing. Oh, we're hiring the best person for the job, right? But we're not reaching everyone. So that's where we can do a lot more to make sure that we're reaching candidates, because it can't just be throwing an ad out on the internet. We aren't tapping into just some really, really talented networks of folks that would be make wonderful additions to our team. So that's, you know, that's where I think we have a lot of work to do.
Awesome.
A lot of us do.
Yeah, I think even I heard a few years ago in somebody's application process, there was a woman who was working with refugees, because there's a large refugee population in Manchester, New Hampshire, and she was working with refugee women to help find them jobs. And they were getting stuck on the application because it was asking for their college degree and the college they went to, and it was a drop down. And they had to pick from whatever US college was available, but they didn't go to school in the US. And so they were selected out of the process because they couldn't enter their college. And so again, making your application simple so that you're not selecting people out and you're continuing to grow that group of candidates that you have access to is important. So looking at those processes, like what are we doing to make sure that I guess we're being anti-racist, right?
Are we asking for degrees where we shouldn't be asking for degrees or don't need to ask for degrees? And there's lots of things that we can do, and you know, stripping as much as possible. Yeah.
I'm curious. I think from an HR perspective, like I think there are so many people who just write job descriptions very, very terribly. I mean, all right, I'll ask you guys. I mean, how many jobs really need degrees?
For us, and actually we're a little bit different, but our company, we largely pride ourselves on the fact that you don't need a degree to move up the ladder. Now we're a plumbing and heating wholesaler, and aside from some of our finance roles, we haven't required them for many. We actually had trouble attracting some folks out of college, so we have a separate program that brings some of those people in, so we could diversify and have recent college grads coming in. But yeah, it's even computer jobs, all of these things that we've seen that had required degrees really don't. There aren't many.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and I think that was an issue I had in my last role, is that some higher level roles like definitely require a degree, like engineering or you know, higher level like acquisitions in real estate.
Yeah.
But I mean, we're seeing so many tech roles that, you know, people are going to, they're going to coding camps or something like that. And like, they don't need a good degree. Like if you're a good developer, you're a good developer,
Right.
or marketing or even HR. And I think that's the next thing too. You know, everybody's like, do you have a degree in HR? But like I am really curious how many up and comers do have a degree in HR. And maybe you guys do, but you know, is a certification enough? Is it?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I have a master's degree, but I advise people to get an MBA. Don't get a degree in HR. And we're seeing more and more people from outside HR get in. And you know, we hired a VP recently who did not have a college degree. And we looked at the experience. And, you know, I think back on two of the most talented folks I've worked with in IT ever were self-taught and no degrees. So it's, I think we're going to see a change. I think we're seeing a change there. I think we'll continue to see a change there. But we're actually a little bit over of what we thought. So we could probably go on for hours and hours and hours, but any kind of final wrap up, Adam, you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think for HR leaders, really dive in to what has happened over the past few weeks. Really dive into the language people use. Like study the language people use. Understand that bias, and then understand why everything has happened. Because I think a lot of HR folks don't understand why. Like this isn't just something that's a 10, 15, 20-year-old problem. This is a 400-year-old issue.
Right.
And if we understand that and truly take steps to prevent that, to actively prevent that and change our systems to make them more equitable, that's how HR can truly reboot itself into an agent of change, using the
Awesome.
HR Rebooted moniker.
Yes, there you go. You have to be bold and courageous and stand up and change things. So we have to change, you know, we have to change ourselves to change our companies and change the culture and change the world.
Yeah, exactly.
So any final comments, Rochelle?
I think that's it. You know, challenge yourself, get out there and learn. And, you know, you have to be not as focused on the policies, right? You said that on LinkedIn today, that, you know, sometimes we just get so focused on this is what the policy says. And really, I think you have to question that and challenge it and be courageous enough to say, policy aside, what's the right thing to do for our people and our culture and our organizations? And you have to have the courage to do that. Right. So thank you, Adam, for joining us.
Good.
This has been
Thank you,
great.
Adam.
Thanks, guys.
We should talk again.
Yes. Thanks, everybody. Bye.